Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
The vastness of space.
Die unendliche Weite.
広大な宇宙
광활한 우주
bajo la inmensidad del firmamento.
In all the known universe, there is but one blue planet.
Es gibt nur einen blauen Planeten im Universum.
そこに浮かぶただ一つの青い惑星
그 우주 내에 오직 하나뿐인 푸른 행성
En todo el universo, un único planeta azul.
And upon this glistening jewel of the cosmos, there is a land unique.
Und inmitten dieses glitzernden Sterns des Kosmos ist ein besonderer Ort.
この宇宙の宝石地球その地球上に類いまれな土地があります
우주의 이 반짝이는 보석 위에 특별한 땅이 있습니다.
Y bajo esa joya radiante del cosmos, un lugar único.
A land we call Alabama.
Der sich Alabama nennt.
その名はアラバマ
알라바마라고 부르는 곳이죠.
La tierra de Alabama.
This land we call Alabama, it seems, draws more and more global attention. Certainly tax incentives have helped lure international businesses here, but any state can offer tax breaks. Can any state offer this? The magnificent beauty, the great natural richness of Alabama offers a quality of life unrivaled across the country, across the world. And it's not just the human life we're talking about.
When it comes to natural history and the natural environment generally in Alabama, which I've been studying off and on all my life, Alabama deserves to be thought of as a relatively unknown jewel within America as a whole. There are very few states, even among the biggest, like California and Texas, that can rival Alabama in the variety of those natural environments.
The world's leading scientists, the international business community, they're all coming to realize what you and I have known all along. In all the known universe, there is but one blue planet, and upon this glistening jewel, there is a unique land we call Alabama. In 1992, we Alabamians recognized our unique place in the universe by electing to keep parts of our natural heritage forever wild. 1992, has it really been 20 years? Time flies. Back in '92, the Forever Wild legislation passed with the greatest public support for such a proposal in the history of the United States. More than 80% of us said yes to the idea that we and our children, and our children's children's children, should know and share the joy of Alabama's wild wonders. We chose to set aside lands for hiking, bird watching, hunting, fishing, you name it. And we chose to set aside lands for what spiritual leaders call a timeout. Sometimes we need a quiet place to take a breath and be at peace with ourselves and the creation.
From a spiritual perspective as well, from a social and cultural perspective, it's It's where we renew ourselves, where we renew our culture, where we renew our sense of connectivity with nature. We are part of nature. Some people like to ignore that fact or deny that fact, but we are natural beings. And you look at any of the major religions, for example. When any of these prophets connected with nature, that moment was in nature. When they had their epiphanies, when they connected with spirituality, when they connected with God, and thus with their fellow man, didn't happen in a building, didn't happen on a busy street. It happened in nature, in wild places. And if we have ever any hope of true worship or true care for our spiritual health, our cultural health in this country, it is in protecting those wild places.
"20 years ago, we Alabamians voted in record numbers to defend our special places from the uncertainties of the future. Join me today for a look back, an evaluation, if you will, at how well we've done. We'll see how an effort by our state became a model for others around the nation. We'll look at how far 20 years of accomplishment have taken us.
And we'll celebrate the renewal of this unique program that promises to keep more and more of Alabama's special places forever wild. This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has maintained its native natural wonders, a place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the wild wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
Welcome to Discovering Alabama. November 3rd, 1992, Bill Clinton was elected to his first term as president with about 43% of the popular vote. And while more than half of Americans could not agree on who should lead the free world, Alabamians could agree that we should protect much of what makes Alabama special. It was on that day, November 3rd, 1992, that we, the people of Alabama, agreed that we would keep parts of our unique natural heritage forever wild. Forever, it seems, had sort of an expiration date. The Forever Wild program that we, the people, supported in overwhelming numbers was to be in effect for 20 years.
Now that we've renewed the program, the lands that have been purchased and will continue to be purchased are forever protected as sanctuaries for you, me, and our children.
In many ways, part of the genius of the original Forever Wild legislation was that we gave ourselves a time limit. We gave ourselves an opportunity to reevaluate our decision. And I don't know about you, but I didn't think 20 years would go by so fast. Yet, here we are. In 20 years, around 220,000 acres have been purchased by the Forever Wild program. These lands are all available to the people of Alabama. These lands are ours for hunting and fishing, for hiking and biking, for recreation and relaxation. And, near and dear to my heart, these lands are ours for education.
Now that we the people have once again chosen in overwhelming numbers to support Forever Wild, I thought it might be useful to take a look back at an episode or two of Discovering Alabama that we've done over the past 20 years. To look back over the past 20 years and remember how we came to support the Forever Wild legislation in the first place.
Overnight, there occurred a phenomenon called Alabama fever. New settlers from Georgia and Tennessee poured into this land of rich resources. Within a few years, the population of the region tripled, and in 1819, Alabama was declared a state. Today, we have indeed been fruitful and multiplied, and the natural qualities and resources of Alabama have been a cornerstone of our growth. But with a pace that has been accelerating for centuries, the modern world now moves at a bewildering speed. Across America, the native landscape gives way to dramatic change. How much more change will come to Alabama? And at what cost to those things natural, wild, and free? The question is whether enough of these lands, waters, and wildlife will remain wild, whether future generations will see the great natural qualities that today make Alabama a very special part of America. The answer to this question depends largely upon the perspective with which we view our state. Those unfamiliar with Alabama often have a limited view. But there is another picture, that of Alabama's great natural diversity. Alabama contains portions of 5 major geological regions and several dozen subregions, and throughout these varied regions flows an extraordinary system of rivers and streams. The grand result is a land of wild wonder that exceeds all but a few settled regions in the world.
Sometimes it seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. Alabama fever swept settlers into the territory in the 1800s, and even then I bet some wondered what was happening to this land they came to know and love. As settlers looked across the vast landscape of untamed wilderness that lay before them, they could not possibly have known how things could change. In less than 100 years, the Industrial Revolution would turn a sleepy little area known as Jones Valley, Alabama, into a magic city. And within a blink of the historical eye, another 100 years would see Alabama contribute to putting a man on the moon. It was about at this time, the late 60s and beyond, that more and more of us began to leave the farm for the cities. But even as we began to note our place with street addresses rather than rural routes, we felt a longing for those connections to nature that our ancestors had taken for granted.
From the beaches in the south to the mountains in the north, Alabama has it all. A splendid blend of nature that sets the state apart from most other regions. I guess for me personally, one of the greatest blessings has been the opportunity to roam Alabama's hills and hollows and backcountry since childhood. I could go on and on about what it all means to me in terms of a life with a sense of place, values rooted in a closeness to the land, the natural surroundings. But I know that these things also mean a lot to most Alabamians. Most of us, deep down, have a real sense of pride for Alabama's natural heritage and the range of benefits that it provides.
There's a certain quality of life that we have acquired that can only be attributed to the fact that we live as close to the land as we do, and it enhances our lifestyle and makes us more content with our lot in life.
We all know that when there's a covered bridge or an old mill or an antebellum home, how precious those are to us and what kind of efforts we'd like to make to see to it that they're preserved. They're a part of our cultural history, very important to us. But man is an organism. Man has to survive through his interrelationships with nature. And this means that our cultural heritage, although it's very important, is not as important as our biological heritage, how we interact with nature. The way we interact with nature ultimately depends on whether our culture, this civilization, we as Alabamians not only in the end live or die, but how pleasant our surroundings eventually are going to be, and whether Alabama is going to be a pleasant place to live, or whether thoughtlessly we're going to develop it into a place that none of us eventually like or even want to tolerate.
Our rich natural surroundings help set a context in which the pace of life is pleasant, where much that was good about the old ways can continue as though captured in time. But also across this lovely land today, we find many signs that time does not stand still for Alabama, nor should it. Much of the growth we've enjoyed and continue to seek is vital to our well-being. But by which standards will we measure the quality of our lives in the years ahead? We must strike the right balance between economic values and natural values.
As development continues, some of the more valuable and/or scenic areas in the state will come under more and more pressure. But Alabama in the last 5 or 6 years, 8 years, I think, has really come of age. And I think it's now a part of our heritage. We talk about natural diversity and natural heritage. I think now that generally the people in the state are aware of the importance of preserving that and managing it into the future so that 10, 20 years from now we don't wake up and it's gone.
I don't think you can understand the environmental issues without being in touch with the outdoors. I would like to see Alabama protect some of its natural heritage, cultural and natural heritage, to save for those generations to come. I'm not referring to just my grandchildren, I'm referring to their grandchildren and their grandchildren.
Because of our slower development, we've been able to retain a lot of our natural resources and the plants and animals that make the state unique. The bad news is that 50 species are already extinct in the state of Alabama, and over 250 species are on a rare and endangered list.
Well, a lot of what we do is going to depend on our perspective, how we view this state, whether we think the state is backwards and therefore we want to change it in development and make it a mirror image of other places, whether we view our state as something to be used like we use up something, or whether we view it as an area where the natural resources are really part of our own lives and we have to interact with them in such a way that we all benefit because we're all in this together.
When you think about it, it's really the remarkable mix of nature that is this place we call Alabama. And many of the state's wildlands still hold the impressive wonders of the state's natural appeal. The future of these lands is in our hands. The practices and policies that we pursue today will determine their future.
The overall question we face in Alabama is a matter of examining options and making choices. What kind of future do we want for our state? Today, Alabama is truly a state of surprises. Much of the state's distinctive natural qualities have remained secret from those unfamiliar with Alabama. Yet it is this very aspect that embodies the greatest allure. And today, a variety of remaining wildlands in Alabama offer a chance to keep this allure for the future. Without our help, they might be forever lost. But if we protect them, they can remain forever wild.
20 years ago, our collective concern for Alabama's future led us to pass the Forever Wild legislation. And I'll be the first to admit our emotional attachment to the land, our love for Alabama's wilds was no small part in passing that legislation. But crafting the legislation that would become the Forever Wild program required us to put our thinking hats on.
When we pulled together the Forever Wild Committee to talk about land acquisition for the state, the genius of it was that it pulled every possible interest group in the state together. And I remember going to the first meeting, there were 33 people in the room, and they represented so many diverse interests, many of whom had never talked to one another except through the news media. But the miraculous thing, and the facilitator of Forever Wild, Doug Phillips, I think did just a genius thing at the very beginning. He had each member write down their greatest fear about Forever Wild or about this kind of program and their greatest hope for it. And what we found out pretty much is we were unanimous that our greatest fear was that it would become too political, and our greatest hope for it was that it would do something good for Alabama.
Be sure that we do things that, and we think not only approve, but the legislature will pass.
You know, the committee, I don't know how you decide. We're talking about a broad area here, and there's going to have to be some give and takes.
I think it's national consensus that what we're about in terms of land acquisition is appropriate.
Well, Forever Wild is simply what it says. It is there forever. And that's the important part. It can never be changed. So we're creating green areas for folks down the road, for our children and our children's children. Alabama, we've got a tremendous amount of wonderful forest and all associated with that. But, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 500 years from now, folks are going to say, wow, those guys are pretty smart so long ago to buy all this up and hold it together. And again, Forever Wild is what it says.
Some have said the genius behind the Forever Wild legislation was bringing together diverse stakeholders from across the spectrum of business, political, and personal aspirations to craft a bill that could secure virtually universal support.
It's amazing to see the coalition that is behind Forever Wild. Alabama Power, lots of large corporations are part of that coalition, but so are the Audubon Society, the Wildlife Federation. So are hunting groups, so is the National Rifle Association. It's an extraordinary coalition that understands the importance and the value of that program, knows the history of that program, that it's been untarnished over all these years, knows the importance of the lands that have been preserved, and this coalition understands that this is something that we need to continue for another 20 years. I think it's true that the coalition that came together around Forever Wild also provided a great platform for a diverse group of organizations to have a conversation about what's important to preserve in this state, what the priorities are. We may not always agree, but those people are in this coalition together because they all understand that Forever Wild is a very important piece of Alabama now.
Alabama's Forever Wild program has obtained a host of special lands and waters across the state. To name just a few, the 209-acre Monsanto tract in Marshall County serves as an extension of Lake Guntersville State Park and provides nesting habitat for the local population of bald eagles. Among the smallest of the Forever Wild purchases is the Pike County Pocosa, about 150 acres or so of unique terrain and habitat. And then there is the Forever Wild purchase by which all others may be measured, close to 50,000 acres of the Mobile-Tensaw Delta. Alabama's Forever Wild program is administered by the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. To make land acquisitions, they use a percentage of the profits on the sale of offshore natural gas. And often they're helped by others. For example,
the Mobile-Tensaw Delta purchase was a historic partnership between these public and private partners to purchase 48,000 acres of land. Forever Wild was a leading partner with most of the responsibility or financial responsibility, but the partnership was made possible by a loan from the Alabama Wildlife Federation. The Nature Conservancy and Ducks Unlimited contributed financially. In addition, the Nature Conservancy wrote a National Coastal Wetland grant that brought another $960,000 towards the project.
The Mobile-Tensaw Delta purchase was the largest conservation acquisition in Alabama's history. It was made possible by the partners who pooled their resources and their expertise. The availability of resources and expertise are certainly important, but there's a third ingredient that's fundamental. That ingredient is the desire of Alabamians to keep unique natural areas forever wild. Okay, let's say you or someone you know owns a special tract of wildland that you think is worthy of protection in the Forever Wild program. What do? Where do you go to check out this possibility?
From a landowner's perspective, if the landowner is interested in his or her land being considered for Forever Wild acquisition, they should first of all contact the State Lands Division. All they need to do is to write a simple statement: I'd like to nominate my land for consideration by Forever Wild. There's no magic in it. That's all they're required to do. At that point, we will contact them and try to determine as much information as possible about the land, and it would be evaluated from there and considered by the board.
Good afternoon. During the last couple of weeks, we sent some correspondence to the board regarding business that was put before the board at the last meeting. Specifically,
So the board meeting is the time when we actually go through the process, and we do it in a way that the public has an opportunity to see what we're doing and express their feelings about what we're doing.
Was asked me to serve as chairman for this meeting.
They implemented before us coming that thing.
The Forever Wild program cannot condemn property. It can only buy from willing sellers. Once it's determined that a nominated property is available, the divisions within the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources evaluate the land.
Come out and see it.
We query our database. We provide information, maps, soil types, any information we have on the tract to our sister divisions, Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries and State Parks. They also evaluate the nomination. That way it's evaluated from all four of the categories that the Forever Wild program buys land for. The four categories are nature preserve, recreation area, state parks, and wildlife management area.
Many Forever Wild purchases fall into more than one category. The 3,000-acre Sipsey Swamp purchase, for example.
The Sipsey is another good example of an acquisition that falls under multiple categories. It was acquired, it was scored, evaluated, and acquired as a recreation area acquisition and also as a nature preserve acquisition. In managing the property for recreational opportunities, we are facilitating passive opportunities like hiking, bird watching, horseback riding, bicycle riding, canoeing, and we're also facilitating some other recreational opportunities like hunting and fishing. We will continue to improve the opportunities that are available to the public from that tract.
Bipartisanship. There's a word you don't see put into practice much in today's political climate. Yet the remarkable thing about Forever Wild is that over the program's 20 years, it found strong support among both Republican and Democratic administrations.
It's not a hard program to support because it has a great record. It's helped us preserve some of the most important places in this state. Forever Wildlands are great tourist draws, which is important for revenue for the state. And a lot of people don't realize that Forever Wildlands also are important for economic development in Alabama, because when you're competing for important industrial projects and economic development projects, states can provide fairly similar incentives. So what it comes down to are those intangibles that separate your place from other places. And one thing that separates Alabama is Alabama's beautiful natural resources. So Forever Wild has been extremely important in helping us to preserve those natural resources, those intangibles, those important places that can really attract companies to the state.
And once again, diverse political interests crossed the proverbial aisle to renew the legislation that allowed we, the people of Alabama, to choose to continue Forever Wild. And again, we did so with record support. But that's not to say the program is without opposition. There are those who believe the government should not own land, period. There's probably not a lot to be said to change a person's mind if that's his or her point of view. The fact is, we live in a nation and a state where we long ago made the choice that government should own land for the public good. So, what good is this land that the people of Alabama own?
The Forever Wild legislation was probably one of the smartest pieces of legislation that was ever enacted in the state of Alabama. Alabama is a treasure of habitats. From the base of the Appalachian Mountains to the Gulf Coast, these habitats are just amazing, and the diversity of animals and plants is unmatched. And so what we need is to maintain these areas and enhance them.
The idea of preserving natural space is one of the single most effective ways that we can protect the environment. And not just the environment that is protected, but by providing these time-out places for nature, for animals, for water. There's knockoff effects on the areas around them that are beneficial, from biodiversity to breeding, to bird stocks, to fish stocks, to water, the systems that clean water naturally, this very substance, H2O, that we all require every day and that is dwindling around the world. Having wild, fresh places are critical for the health of our environment in an increasingly urbanizing world.
Scientists and environmentalists are often accused of conspiring against monetary interest. These days, though, all sides are coming to realize that you cannot separate the economics and ecosystems.
In arguing for the saving and even the restoration of natural environments all around us, we tend to overlook beyond the aesthetic value, the entertainment value, the, how shall I put it, spiritual value. As important as those are, there is the economic value. And that includes the value that natural systems, undisturbed natural systems, provide to our lives and our economy. We call them ecological services. I think every school child should be able to recite the ecological services that nature provides. They include cleansing the water. They include, in forest and other natural vegetation assemblages, they include holding the water and releasing it so it doesn't come down in a flood and leave behind dry land. They include regeneration of the soil. They include the provision of all sorts of natural products that we make use of, that we're just beginning to explore as a possible yield from the many different kinds of species that we've hardly begun to study, and on and on. Some years ago, a group of economists and ecologists made an estimate, very rough obviously for the whole world, of a value in dollars that the natural ecosystems of the world give us scot-free. And that dollar value is very roughly that of the gross world product, which is the combined gross national product, or gross domestic product more accurately, of all of the nations in the world.
Ecologists and economists agree that the services provided by nature are on a par with the gross national products of the world. That's a profound thought. To put it another way, with all the money in the world, we could not create the creation. The natural services creation provides are large, but they're not the only economic benefit our ecosystems provide.
Alabama is a surprising place for people who've never been here before, and we've seen that with folks from Mercedes, from other international companies that come here, and whatever their impression is of Alabama, they're always surprised to see how beautiful Alabama is, how green Alabama is, the mountains, the beaches. And it is truly one of our great attractions, great draws for industry when we can bring someone here and they can see the tremendous natural resources we have, the tremendous beauty, the tremendous amenities. And Forever Wild has been a strong part of that by allowing us to help preserve these important places that help draw economic development to the state.
Economists know the value natural areas bring to the quality of life in our state. And while the competition heats up over tax breaks, there are very few places with such variety and outdoor recreational opportunities as can be found here in Alabama. Outdoor recreation is vital to the state's economy. And while many are attracted for our more domesticated nature, like golf trails and the beaches, many too come for the pristine wildlands. Some come for the recreation, and some just to get away. The dollars we circulate within our own borders are critical to the state's economy. Hunting alone, for example, brings millions into the coffers. It's more than a contribution of dollars, though. Hunting, fishing, camping, canoeing, all of the outdoor activities we conveniently call recreation contribute to who we are. The traditions we long to pass to our children are so often those things we remember from our own childhood, those things we shared with our parents in the outdoor world. But so what, some might ask? When I was a kid, there was no Forever Wild program, yet somehow my folks managed to share time with me in the woods and waters. But times have changed. Increasingly, access to wildlands is restricted.
The counter to this is to pay individuals to put their land into a trust, but the problem with putting their land into the trust, the public has absolutely no access, and so it becomes that person's private little trust, whereas the Forever Wild Act allows the public now and for generations to come to benefit from having these lands. For example, the Mobile Tensaw Delta, the 148,000 acres, will never be forested. It will never be cut. And so, I mean, and the public has ready access in and out of that. It's also it's a wonderful tool for learning what natural habitats are like.
What we grew up with, having places to go out, it ain't gonna be there for the next generation if we don't begin to address those issues now through programs like Forever Wild. And those places are bought by the state of Alabama with proceeds from the state of Alabama's trust funds. They're set aside for future generations to love and to enjoy and to understand where they are. This delta that we're looking at, I mean, this delta is brought to you by Forever Wild. There are Forever Wild properties throughout the state, from the Walls of Jericho, a phenomenal place, incredible place, up north of Huntsville, along the Cahaba River, one of North America's great rivers, great and beautiful rivers, around Montgomery and in the Black Belt, down through the Red Hills, throughout the state. Beautiful areas that Forever Wild has preserved for us that allow us to keep touch with this Alabama that we grew up with and that is so important to our identity and to our state character.
When I first was on the board, Alabama was way behind in the amount of public land for use for nature, viewing, for recreation, for hunting, for fishing, for all those many purposes. We were well behind some of our southern neighbors. Since that time, we've made great stride by adding thousands of acres. It's a nice combination of different types of land that serve all Alabamians, no matter whether you're a bird watcher or you're a fisherman or you're a hunter. There are uses for all of this, and I think it needs to remain that way.
That's one thing that's really fantastic about Forever Wild. Almost all the properties that have been preserved by Forever Wild are, yes, preserved, but they're preserved for the public. They're used for hunting, they're used for recreation. They're places that draw tourists, and almost all those places are open and accessible to the public, and they bring tourist dollars here to Alabama, but they're also places that we all can share and we can all enjoy. And that itself is a very cool thing, to think that you can go and have a great time at a place and you know it's also helping protect the biological diversity of our state.
Maybe it's the arrogance of modernity which causes us to think that concern for the environment is a construct of recent generations. Or maybe it's the fact that we of recent generations have seen so many of our natural areas disappear. The rapid change of the 20th century has been unprecedented in human history. We went from Kitty Hawk to the moon, and we went from the farm to the city. The city then began to sprawl into the countryside. Yet, for all of our modern achievement, our bodies are still rooted in the dust of the earth. We are of the creation, and we the people of Alabama have once again chosen to keep a small portion of our special piece of the creation forever wild. Perhaps it was the talk of forever wild in terms of economic development, tourism, hunting, or fishing. Perhaps it was the talk of critical habitat for wildlife, clean water, and clean air. On the other hand, who knows? Maybe it doesn't come down to the logic we find in words. Maybe it comes down to the truth we feel in our hearts. Our heritage as Alabamians reaches deep into the wilds of the past. Our legacy can be one that reaches into the wilds forever.
Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History, the University of Alabama. This program is supported by grants from the Solon and Martha Dixon Foundation, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935, and the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, State Lands Division.